Sorry, it's 2 o'clock, or just gone to, in fact. So can we start, please? And welcome to the Economy, Business Growth and Skills Over and Scrutiny Committee. We've got apologies from Daniel Meredith and Yvonne Carty. We know that Kate Lewis is running slightly late, but she's expected. And Fred Walker is here again as a substitute. And Fred, thank you very much for stepping into the breach again. Chair's announcement and urgent business. We've got 2 on this occasion. The first is, as I suppose, it's a recurring theme. It's just a quick update on Brexit, which I think Simon's going to do that. But before we,
do we have to mention the word?
Pardon?
Do we have to mention the word?
But before we do that, we've got the local industrial strategy. Now, I just want to point out that a paper was going to come to this meeting. For us to go through in some detail after the briefing we had at the previous meeting. There have been some, I suppose the word is political issues or logistical issues to get this finalised. So, which was all explained to me. So we've had a compromise, haven't taken legal advice internally as to what we could bring to the committee. And it's important that we brought something. And therefore, what we have brought is a presentation which John is going to do, but it is subject to, obviously, we can ask any question we want to ask on this item, and clearly it's now in the public domain, and hence you've got a copy of the briefing papers. So, John, over to you, but could you explain a little bit about the background, why it's only a presentation rather than a full-blown report?
Yes, can do, Chair. So you've got a set of slides in front of you. We did want to share a draft of a full strategy with you, but government weren't happy with that going into the public domain before they'd agreed that wording with us. And on the advice of the Scrutiny Officer for the Combined Authority, it didn't meet the criteria for being a Part B item either. So we felt that the best way to bring you up to speed with what was happening with the local industrial strategy was to talk you through this presentation. Obviously, the presentation's got a reasonable amount of detail about where we're up to in it, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have as we go through. So the Chair has instructed me that I have no more than 15 minutes, so I will be as brief as I can be. I think I think it's the 4th time the industrial strategy has come to this group, so I won't labour the National Industrial Strategy Framework, which if you don't know now, I guess you might never know it, but 5 foundations of productivity, which are pretty standard, and then these 4 big global opportunities that the UK wants to put this country at the heart of, which they call grand challenges. We were identified as one of 3 national trailblazers in the autumn budget in 2017. So it's us, West Midlands and Oxford, Cambridgeshire, all agreed that we would work towards having local industrial strategies agreed with government by the end of March 19. And we're still hopeful that we'll be able to meet that deadline despite the challenging political situation nationally. We set up 3 independent work streams which all come together to develop the industrial strategy. We've had a really strong focus on the evidence base and set up an independent panel to look at that for us. We've had a lot of local consultation with businesses, community voluntary organisations, universities, and so on, including a full consultation in autumn this year when we spoke to over 500 stakeholders as part of a public consultation. And then we've also had a programme of joint policy development activity, both with government and with local authority partners across Greater Manchester. I'll talk a little bit about the evidence base before we get onto the strategy, because that is really important for the grounding of the strategy. We set up a panel. They have looked at 5 areas relating to productivity and inclusive growth broadly. They met 3 times over the course of the year. We've just released earlier this month all the background papers on that, so there's more papers than you could ever hope to read on there. There's about 14 papers on there which have been produced by universities and other research organisations to feed that report. the reviewers' report was published in Manchester in early February, and we had a second event in London at the start of March, and there was over 400 stakeholders at those two events, and I think that just sort of demonstrates the interest that there is both locally and nationally in the development of the Greater Manchester industrial strategy. The recommendations of that prosperity review are absolutely critical for how we framed the GM industrial strategy. There's a lot in there, but I've just sort of picked out what I think are the key points that have pulled directly through into the industrial strategy. I think the first thing that the prosperity review is very strong on is that an industrial strategy to raise productivity and earnings in Greater Manchester needs to focus on both the opportunities we have in high growth, innovation, frontier sectors, so where we've got unique opportunities, but also in the foundational economy, so the bulk of the economy where people work, so sectors like social care, hospitality and tourism, retail, where we have real challenges around productivity in those sectors and issues around low pay. A strong message coming through was the importance of health for productivity. I think that's a new finding, something that we hadn't given such prominence to before, and they said that improving health needs to be absolutely critical to the strategy. They drew out particular strengths for us in sectoral terms, in health innovation, advanced materials and manufacturing, digital and creative industries and professional services. And they identified those as opportunities that we should grasp and be working with government to capitalise on. They had a long discussion, or many discussions around the shift to clean growth. There is a recommendation that we take a mission-based approach to the 2038 carbon neutral ambition, to bring together the various actors we've got in Greater Manchester, so green industries, community voluntary organisations, public authorities, to really get behind that mission to both improve quality of life for residents and also to generate new industries. I think we're also very keen to point out that there is a risk around that 2038 target that acts as a constraint on growth, so we shouldn't be overly optimistic about that. We also need to be looking to support firms, particularly those who have high carbon intensive operations, to make that transition to a zero carbon economy. Reflecting what we've known for a long time, they flagged again the importance of skills. I think they updated our understanding of the skills system by looking at the system as a whole, and they found it to be fragmented and delivering less than the sum of its parts, and really said we need to grasp that working with government. They also raised the importance of working with firms to boost skills utilisation, because we've seen a big increase in the qualifications of Greater Manchester's workforce over the past decade, but we haven't seen a corresponding increase in productivity as you'd expect. One of the reasons behind that is that those skills aren't being effectively utilised by firms. They made a series of recommendations around how we can support firms to be more productive, critical amongst those, in addition to the skills utilisation point, around leadership and management of firms, around innovation adoption, and particularly around how we can support firms to be more international in their orientation. And finally, they took a look at the infrastructure needs of Greater Manchester, building on the work we've been doing through the spatial framework and related documents. And they supported the recommendation of the National Infrastructure Commission made recently to say that infrastructure funding needs to be devolved to city regions, and it needs to be long-term, substantial, stable, and in place for local discretion. So I think some of those key messages really flow through into that document. There's also a discussion in the Prosperity Review around how we deliver a more inclusive form of growth, and their conclusion was that it's a two-pronged thing we need to do. Firstly, important that lagging areas have access to good jobs locally, and that critical in that is about those improvements to the foundational economy that I talked to, but we also need to make sure that residents across the city region have access to jobs, particularly in the centre where the bulk of jobs growth is likely to be, and that requires investment in transport and again skills. And their concluding remark was around that for a local industrial strategy, whilst further investment is needed in Greater Manchester's assets, their recommendations were really focused around how we can improve coordination and better capitalising on what we've already got, better coordination of national and local decision making, and again that flows through into the industrial strategy itself. This slide sets out the framework which we've put in place for the local industrial strategy, really trying to marry the Greater Manchester strategy, the Prosperity Review findings and the National Industrial Strategy to bring those together into a coherent framework. What the framework does is say that to deliver prosperous places across Greater Manchester, we need a twin-track approach. One track is around capitalising on our unique opportunities, so in health innovation, advanced materials, manufacturing, digital media and creative, and the shift to clean growth. The second track being around how we support the foundations of the economy for all industries and all people to prosper, and that's about raising skill levels, about improving infrastructure and getting funding in place for that infrastructure, around capitalising on the research and development assets we've got in the city region, and about boosting the business environment, so how we support firms to raise their productivity. The following remaining slides just go into more detail on each of those elements and start to flesh out what the strategic priorities are in the strategy itself. So on health innovation, we have unique opportunity nationally in Greater Manchester. The academic asset base we've got here is nationally significant, the largest outside the South East. The life sciences sector we've got here again is the largest outside the South East. And in health and social care devolution, we've got an opportunity to connect those assets and industries into the health service locally and drive that forward. And the investments we've made in Health Innovation Manchester as a body to do that for us gives us a capacity that no other place has. As well as being our opportunity, I think health is also our challenge, and the Prosperity Review is really clear about that. So what the strategy does is ties those two things together and say it's no good for us just to bring in new innovations into health unless they're benefiting our residents. So what we've agreed with government is that we will continue to develop that test bed, but we'll also work with them on a pipeline of innovation, linking together our local priorities with national priorities to improve population health, to improve the social performance of the social care system in particular. And we've had a very positive reception to that from the Department for Health and Social Care, the Office for Life Sciences, and the government's Ageing Society team. So I think that's a strong area for us. And on advanced materials and manufacturing, again, we've obviously got a long history of manufacturing in Greater Manchester. I think in graphene we do have a genuine international opportunity, and one that's at the very start of its growth trajectory, really. It's only been isolated for 14 years. Our argument to government has been, from a graphene perspective, that the UK is not grasping that opportunity as significantly as it should be. I mean, it has the potential to respond to all four of the grand challenges to create a new world-leading industry in Greater Manchester, and national government is not grasping that sufficiently. I think we've made progress by developing the institutions we've got, but now what we need to do is put the ecosystem, for want of a better word, around those assets so that the innovation that's happening at the universities can spread out into our business space locally and create jobs in the area. So a sort of graphene opportunity is something that we flag up because it is a national priority. But we also want to strengthen the manufacturing sector locally. So we talk about strengthening clusters of manufacturing growth across the city region, connecting those together, capitalising in our existing strong employment sites, but also those new sites which will be coming forward following the spatial framework consultation, or depending on the outcomes of the spatial framework consultation. And we also talk about how we can better support all manufacturers to shift to more digital forms of production. So the Industry 4.0 made smarter revolution, which is driving manufacturing now, and making sure that we are at the forefront of that fourth industrial revolution in the way that we were at the forefront of the first and second. We've provisionally agreed with government a new local national partnership with them around advanced materials and manufacturing to better coordinate our activities with national government. So that partnership would bring together businesses, universities, local authorities, as well as national government and UK RI, which is the main innovation funding agency, which would be a big step forward. Around digital and creative industries, again, we've got nationally significant assets and industries here which are really driving growth, principally in the regional centre at Media City and in the city centre itself. What we've also seen though recently is a real growth in the creative and digital industries in our town centres and high streets, and we think that's a real opportunity for driving improvements in economic performance of those areas. Developments like Ashton Baths in Ashton, the creative industry sector which is springing up around Ramsbottom and will be coming forward through Wigan Old Courts. We see these as good opportunities for us to develop new industries in our town centres. So we're looking to promote that. Again, the digital is a big theme that comes through the whole strategy, but the digitalisation of the whole economy is something which is happening, and we want to be able to support that. And we talk about developing a sort of made smarter type approach for all industries to facilitate that. And the final area we're looking at is the area around digital citizens, so both how we can invest in new digital public services to deliver better public services to our residents to support them to be in work, as well as how we can open up public data to drive improvements. So things like real-time traffic information, which is shown to have a positive effect on growth in other cities. The final opportunity area is around the Clean Growth Grand Challenge, and we want to set a clean growth mission for Greater Manchester to drive the shift towards carbon neutrality by 2038, and to do that in a way that benefits quality of life in the local area, but also stimulates the development of new industries in our area and supports firms to transition to low carbon production techniques where they are currently in carbon intensive activities. So I'm conscious of time, so I think that's really the sort of new things that the strategy is coming out with. I think the sort of foundational stuff will probably feel more familiar to members. So we've got a range of interventions relating to people on the skills and work agenda, and really the main thing we're pushing there is for a partnership with government around that whole education, skills and work system to drive improvements in performance of that system across the piece, as well as to link skills provision to the opportunities in our industrial strategy. Around infrastructure, we talk about the developing Greater Manchester Infrastructure Plan, which is coming on stream, and the suggestion is that government join our infrastructure board to work with us and develop that jointly with us. We also talk about the need to identify new ways in which we can fund that infrastructure, because we know the funding models don't exist. There's some short and long-term actions needed for specific transport investments, rail devolution, bus reform, tram trains in the short term. In the longer term, reiterating the importance of Northern Powerhouse Rail, High Speed 2, and the continued development of the airport. And then we also talk about the importance of digital infrastructure as well, with some specific dates around full fibre coverage and 5G. On ideas, we are there talking about maintaining, developing our existing academic research strengths, ensuring that the innovation in those areas spreads out to firms across the conurbation, and also working with firms to increase the take-up of national research and development incentives, where in Greater Manchester that is lower than the rest of the UK, and that's something we want to correct. On the business environment, we focus in on raising leadership and management quality in firms, bringing forward the good employment charter, supporting more firms to start up and scale up, and supporting firms to internationalise further. And the place section provides a narrative around how we're going to link in the activities in the industrial strategy with the priority locations identified in the spatial framework, so both employment sites and town centres, and how we can put in place the infrastructure and the conditions for investment, private sector investment to happen in all parts of Greater Manchester. And that section also connects across to ensuring that we focus in our different interventions to those neighbourhoods that have the lowest performance around skills, work and health, as well as linking into the emerging work on the public service reform model, which is being released imminently. And the final slide, just to bring up on the strategy itself, is around the outcomes we've agreed. So previously at this committee, we've talked about targets being in the local industrial strategy. Government haven't been willing to include any hard numerical targets in the local industrial strategy. In part, that's because they haven't agreed any national targets in the national industrial strategy, and Treasury see any hard targets locally as unfunded spending commitments. So they're wise to that line. What we have agreed with them, though, is a series of 2040 outcomes, and what we've agreed is to put in a monitoring framework around progress towards those outcomes, and those are shown on that slide. And then just to conclude on the next steps on this, so we are currently still in negotiations with government, both around the text and the specific proposals. We're hopeful that we will conclude that within the next week, and then that will enable us to update the Combined Authority at its meeting in March on progress with that. We're again sort of depending on agreements reached with government. We will then finalise a date to publish it and launch it, and those discussions haven't been completed yet. But one thing that doesn't talk about then is the implementation, and again those discussions are still ongoing, but what we want to put in place is a joint implementation process with government. So this isn't just a point in time agreement, it's something that we live and breathe between national and local government, and we're hopeful that there'll be a role for the National Industrial Strategy Council, which has just been set up to oversee implementation of local industrial strategies as well as a national strategy, which I think would be a powerful mechanism to start to drive change at a national level too. So conscious that was quite a quick run through, and I think I overran by a couple of minutes, so apologies to the chair, but very happy to take questions on that.
Thank you, John. Before I throw out the questions, Sam, is there anything you want to add to that? But I was going to say in particular, but now rather than in particular, an observation. When will this committee now see the final version of this report? Because even if we're doing it slightly retrospectively, I think it's important we see it. And I think it's also vitally important that at that meeting we have the portfolio holder here to obviously answer any questions that we may have specifically on the strategy.
So, and I apologise, I was a couple of minutes late, but obviously explained that we couldn't present it this time around because it's still, we've effectively been told by government, because we're still in final negotiation, not to release the document itself. And I think John's done a brilliant job of walking you through it without actually showing it to you, as it were. The plan is, subject to those negotiations with the government concluding successfully in the next week or so, that it will come to the April meeting of this committee for being to be the final document that you would then be able to look at the whole document, and then obviously the conversation moves more into implementation and how we implement, and obviously through Emma we'll make sure that the portfolio holder is available.
Susan.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, my mic is on. Forgive me. I want to ask you about, so it's co-production work with government. That's one of the standout issues, isn't it? Is there any trade-off at all in having a lead role in supporting UK growth? Because that is one of the strap lines in having an industrial strategy. Yeah, that's been on a number of papers we've received. So is there any trade-off in having a lead role in supporting UK growth, but leading growth for Greater Manchester? Or is every bit of those two things coterminous? The only other thing I thought about from your presentation, John, thank you, was where you described this history of an increase in skills amongst the population, an increase in qualifications that's perhaps not been taken up enough by employers. Is there a view, though, that perhaps there was a mismatch? So when people were increasing their skills, it might have been that some of that might not have been what employers were seeking. So is there a bit more to it? Is it a bit more nuanced? I mean, if it isn't, I accept what you say. Thank you.
Yeah, I can answer both. I guess what we've tried to do through the strategy is to minimise the trade-off, because there is potentially a trade-off in that you could have a local industrial strategy that says, well, we will invest in an asset in Greater Manchester and then connect that into firms across the UK. So investment in Greater Manchester will benefit firms which are in Cambridge or Edinburgh or what have you. And I guess in part some of the national assets that we're arguing should be supported in Greater Manchester will do that to an extent. What we are trying to do through the strategy is make sure that Greater Manchester benefits from those national opportunities to the greatest potential, but it can. Also, what we'll be trying to do is ensure that, particularly in the health innovation and advanced materials sphere and clean growth, actually, that the strategic challenges that we put to those institutions or assets are the ones which we are facing. So to give an example on clean growth, the real question we've got locally is how do you develop technologies for retrofitting of housing which are commercially viable at scale? And that's a question that we'll want to ask our universities to help us support, and the University of Salford's Energy House is one opportunity to look at that. So what we want to do is ask those national assets in Greater Manchester to respond to the strategic issues which we face. So I think you're right. There is potentially a trade-off, but we'll be looking to mitigate that. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right on the on why skills hasn't necessarily improvements in qualifications hasn't necessarily fed through into productivity improvements. I think in part that's because the wrong training was being provided. I think it's in part because the training and qualifications were just recognising the skills that people already had, so it wasn't actually giving them new competencies. But I think all those sort of issues speak of a system that isn't really responding to the needs of the individual or the employer, and that again is what we'll be trying to deal with through this strategy.
Can I just pick up on that point, John? I mean, I remember when I first became a councillor 13 years ago, and that was a big issue in Rochdale, because obviously I wasn't aware of what was going on in Greater Manchester. And things haven't really changed in many ways. There's still this problem with getting the right skills in the right place. And in your presentation, I think one of the phraseology you've got in here, the skills system is fragmented and delivering less than the sum of its parts, which really struck with me. And I think one of the things that I mentioned to Simon in my briefing session, but it'd be worthwhile just raising this now in the public forum, that one of the ways in which we could improve things in Manchester, in my judgment, if we could have greater control of education generally, just in the same way we've got with integrated care fund and health. And I'm just wondering, what is the likelihood, perhaps, of something like that happening, here, so that we can actually maximise the sort of types of skills that our people actually need and want, and what employers want. And because at the end of the day, the best way to take people out of poverty is to give them the right skills and the right opportunities in life.
No, that's fine. And just before I come in on that point, just to pick up on Susan's point before and echo what John says. I just think we are promoting some of the assets that we have in Greater Manchester enough as being assets that can help drive UK growth as well. So I think the two are consistent, and we're just not making enough of some of those assets to drive UK growth. And the other thing on the skill system is that the skill system has changed, or the way in which we think about skills in the UK has changed fundamentally. So it's a bit of a caricature, but people used to kind of learn up to the age of 25, then go and work for an employer for 40 years, and that employer used to invest in them and their training over a long period of time. That system doesn't hold true anymore, because actually people don't go and work for an employer. A lot of people are on 0 hours contracts, etc. So a lot more learning has got to be done by that individual themselves, and therefore the way we think about the skills system as a whole needs to change. I mean, you are right. The skills system is fragmented. The review showed that, and the review said that you need to join up the elements of that system. There's kind of two ways of doing that. One is by working very closely with the department, particularly Department for Education, so that you look at the system as a whole and you control your own elements to drive a kind of a more integrated system. The other is obviously full devolution. My view of where we are is that we're in the former, i.e. we're likely to be able to progress our partnership with the Department for Education. I don't think we're in the latter in terms of likelihood to get any significant devolution at this point in time under the current arrangements.
Luke, then Mark.
Thank you for running through that breakneck speed, but I appreciate you had to. My question is around, so often in economic policy we reach for the levers of, on the supply side I suppose, it's all we've got very often. So whether it's, so to pick three, like management practices and innovation and skills, we're often like pushing on a piece of string, and the problem is actually that employers aren't adopting these things, whether because often they don't want to. As a matter of fact, they don't really want to innovate often, businesses, and not all of them of course, but there are many out there that don't necessarily want to become more productive, they just want to do what they want to do, and they don't necessarily want to train their staff. And so from my perspective, I see a lot of the problem is on that demand side, and I wondered how far we're getting with that, with this industrial strategy, beyond just the sort of classic interventions of like increasing skills supply and increasing innovation, when actually the problem is very often on that other side of things. The second question is related to social care specifically, and what interventions are planned there, because that is something we have that direct control over that we don't in other sectors, and just a bit more detail on that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Sure, I mean it's absolutely right on the, but I guess the issues are on the demand side. I think as you'll be aware, it's more challenging to affect the demand side than it is on the supply side, particularly around some of those business and skills issues. I think one of the well, I guess in Greater Manchester we've got the Business Growth Hub, which provides that demand side stimulus and supports firms to develop that growth mindset and to want to move on that trajectory. I guess there's always going to be some firms who don't want to do that, and in many instances that's absolutely fine, and we just need to make sure that the people working for those firms are able to move on if they wish to do so. I think the new intervention, which comes through strongly in industrial strategy, is around the role of a good employment charter, because I think that is the new way that we've got to work with firms, both to raise productivity but to raise job quality as well, and that was picked up by the panel as a good way that you can start to get into the demand side, using the leadership capacity that we've got here. On the social care side of things, what we've done is dovetailed in with the work that the Health and Social Care Partnership have been doing around the Living Well at Home model, and that has two key elements to it. One is around the technological side, so the adoption of new assisted living technologies into the social care sector itself, and the other one is around the workforce issues in that sector, and the Prosperity Review again was very clear about the challenges that we face in the social care sector locally around issues of low pay, and the social care sector is a low-paying sector across the UK, but in Greater Manchester the prevalence of low pay is twice the national average, and addressing workforce issues will help to support that. I think ultimately though it does come down to how those services are commissioned, so that's something that we'll be working with the Social Care Partnership and local authorities on as we implement the strategy.
Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Can I first of all say I agree with the comments you made immediately after John had stopped speaking, which was concerning having the proper report, which is what we're expecting today, at the next meeting, and having the portfolio holder responsible for it here as well. Because if the scrutiny, it's not the first time I've made this point, but if this scrutiny system is to have any relevance at all, it's got to be seen to be relevant, it's got to be seen to be open and transparent, and that means timely reports, and it means the portfolio being present so we can ask the questions. That said, and I noticed Simon chose his words carefully when he added to that by saying the plan is to get it to the April meeting. Well, the plan was originally to have it at this meeting, so I'm not sure just how confident we can be with the best one in the world. I hope you can say we can be confident, but you did use the word we plan to have it in April. So, you know, we can't afford, on what we've all agreed previously, is one of our major work streams, this industrial strategy. It's not just another report on the agenda. This is one of our major things, and we can't afford for those delays to happen. I'm not sure, having listened to the presentation and read the slides, if, frankly, we have learned anything much new today. I genuinely don't know that we have, because it seems to me that everything in the slides, and by the way, congratulations, I think, for establishing a new world record for the number of words on a single slide. But I'm not sure the content of them told us much that we didn't already know. We have discussed the industrial strategy before, and it seemed to me pretty much all the themes that John alluded to and that are in the slides are matters that we've discussed before. So I'm interested in progress. I'm sure we all are. And I wrote down, Susan was the first to mention this point, the point John made about the increase in skills and qualifications not being replicated with any increase in productivity. And I wrote down why. And I'm still no clearer as to understanding, but that might be, you know, a job of work in and of itself to draw that out. One thing's for sure, if, and I think again it was John that had said this in a subsequent answer, the wrong training was being provided, then, you know, we need to bottom this issue and make sure that we're doing something about it, because otherwise, you know, the whole thing is held below the waterline. It seems, somebody else, I think it was Luke, mentioned about pushing a piece of string. Well, my knowledge is like it's pulling the string, but the bell isn't ringing at the other end. We're setting all these grand plans and strategies, but I'm not seeing the evidence, and it might just be because it's not here in front of us yet. I'm not suggesting none of this is happening, but the progress does seem glacial, Chair, and I do hope we can be confident this report will come forward in April and that we will see at least some specific signs of progress on some of these key elements. Because I have to say, I think the absence of the main report today and what's in the slides, there's a lot of detail in the slides, but I thought it was just a little bit disappointing. I was expecting more today from the fact that this was a proper agenda item.
I'll let John answer the question, obviously. The only thing I would say is that as I've been informed, you know, originally we weren't having anything at all, but I said we had to have something because of what government said. So I'm taking that, I know, as presented, but we need to see, what I've already said, the final version of this report. And the other thing I would say, the point you make with regard to skills is why I made the point that, no, this has been an issue since I've been a councillor. And it, you know, we talk about it, and we never get, well, we never seem to get very far, let's say. So I'm hoping, obviously, this will drive things forward with the appropriate degree of focus, because it is a strategy, but it's also what is deliverable in terms of detailed plans behind that strategy. John.
Just to come back on the point about timings, obviously I think it's been recognised this is a co-produced strategy with national government, so we are relying on national government keeping to its own timescales. I don't think I'm saying anything which is controversial to say that government has got other things on its mind at the moment, which has meant that getting detailed feedback from secretaries of state on our proposals has been very challenging. I think we feel that, well, it seems that there is now some progress on that, and there is hopefully going to be a call between Andy Burnham and Richard Leese and Greg Clark early next week to nail down the final details of the strategy. So I think we can be reasonably confident that that will happen, which will then unlock the agreement. But obviously, pending unless and until that conversation goes ahead, we can't be certain about that. Simon, if you want to.
Mark, are you happy with that response? Yeah. Okay. Well, Fred first, then Robert.
Sorry. I had a presentation. We had a presentation from Westfield. It was about automated cars, as it happens, but what was so classic about it was, again, it was a report that we hadn't seen before, so we didn't know what was coming. Now, when you get a report that you don't know what's coming, to put that many words into anything is just crazy. It really is, and it ought to be a massive lesson to us. You know, if that's the best we can do, we need to start all over again. Having said that, in my head, if I'm absolutely honest, I see this as a bid for money, if I'm honest. So I see it as a bid for getting money out of government. And if that's what it's for, then I recognise you've got to press the buttons that they want you to press. And there's nothing wrong with that, because without the money, we can't do a million of the things that we want to do. But what I'd like to think, because it's actually more important than the money, our industrial strategy for Greater Manchester is so fundamental. You know, it's our future, it's everything, isn't it? Forget all the clean air and all the other things with disabled people and all the other things we love. If we don't get our industrial strategy right, all the rest just falls apart. So what I'd like to think, and maybe it's for a future time once we've got this bid out of the way, is that underneath it we've got actually an attainable strategy. That's going on in, you know, the stuff we can influence where we can make a difference. And that I will, for instance, be able to measure in a few years' time how it's going. So I hope very much that that's the case. I do think, because again, when I saw that piece about, you know, our disjointed skills offer, you know, it's totally embarrassing, isn't it? But part of the problem is, and it's a problem we've had for a long time, when we used to ask industry about what they wanted, they didn't tell us the truth. You know, what they wanted was someone with all the skills that that guy needs to do that one specific job. And the minute that job's over, that person is useless. And that's no use to man the beast, because the way jobs are changing now. So that it doesn't really work just asking them. So I think the government's thinking was, well, the real incentive is if we can't get it right, give them the money. You know, and that's been part of it. Although then we see that with this apprenticeship thing that the take-up on the money has been crap. You know, it's embarrassing, isn't it? You know, there was an opportunity for them to use these chunks of money. And you know, everyone's got surpluses of it lying all over the place. And we're trying to find Mickey Mouse ways of using it up. So I don't know what the magic answer is, but somewhere along the line, because that is an area where we ought to be influencing and we ought to be doing the forward thinking, because I'm not sure each individual firm will do it for itself on their little tiny sector, but I think that we have to have a genuine look in that area to see what we can make work better. And it won't, you know, just rejigging what we already do, you know, on those two themes isn't going to cut it.
John and or Simon, do you want to respond to that?
So, I mean, you raised a whole load of issues there, Fred. I think pick up on a number of things. You know, the Greater Manchester strategy sets out very clearly where Greater Manchester wants to be and aims to be by 2020. It's got targets, it's monitored, etc. The local industrial strategy sits as part of the Greater Manchester strategy. The local industrial strategy was always about those things where we had got particular economic assets and opportunities that we wanted to work with government around. So it wasn't everything, it was where those things we needed to work with government around, as well as things we wanted to kind of put out more into the public domain, as well as some of the barriers and challenges that we face. So it is a subset of everything that Greater Manchester needs to do. It's a hugely important subset, but it is within that suite of the Greater Manchester Strategy, which has got very clear targets against it. You know, we are only at the point of writing the strategy at this point. There is an implementation plan that will come that will say what, you know, how exactly a lot of these things are going to be taken forward. So specifically, you know, a lot of the work we are doing, you know, in a previous, you know, maybe 3-4 years ago, we might have been talking about, you know, devolution of various things. The government is not in that space at the moment. We are talking very much more about working in partnership with government to move things forward and drive things forward. And using the skills as a really good example of that, actually, yeah, I think everybody recognises the system is not delivering as much as it could, and we need to get the system to deliver more. And by working in partnership, we can work out a lot of the solutions to some of those problems, and drive real change forward. But it's not going to be quick, and it's not going to be an overnight thing that you know, within 6 months we're going to see this change. We can begin to see change, absolutely, but actually, you know, there is a long road to go down on the skills system, because as the chair said, it's not been working quite as it should have been for a very long period of time. We need to find the key and the kind of the primary areas that we need to work on, and that has to be with government, because they control a lot of the levers in that space. So we have to work with them to actually work out the major things we can do to begin that change.
And just to add to that, actually, in terms of the implementation plan, we do need smart objectives. You know, I specifically manageable, measurable, sorry, you know, etc. Because, you know, you can't have just wishy-washy things in there, and that is so important, actually. Fred, can you keep it short? We're really running out of time, actually.
You mentioned graphene. And graphene was invented about 30 years ago in Manchester. You know, and not much has happened. Yeah.
Just a quick point of order, because I know you're rounding this up now. So we're the biggest economy outside of London for the whole of this UK, right? We've got at least three, plus the fantastic officers, politicians on this. Andy Burnham, Paul Donnett, we've got Sean Fielding involved, of course, as well, with the skills and what have you matter. Okay, this is not a finance bid. I know we all want to do our homework before we come to the meetings, you know. It's not a finance bid, it's co-production work, and actually we're on track to, very likely, because we've said we want to do it differently, we want to have inclusive growth to deliver for our people at the heart of this industrial strategy. We're on track, this is from me, and from others, I'm sure, to have the best industrial strategy. Some people will judge this as the best industrial strategy for the biggest economy outside of London, okay? It's hard work, and the work that must have been put into this by the officers, you know, already, it's huge what you've accomplished already. So, and we recognise that. That was my point of order. Thank you, Chair.
But obviously, we heard it scrutinised as well. But I think, you know, I think we do recognise this is a big task, and the things that we are now attacking, perhaps they've been ignored in the past. You know, and particularly on skills, etc.
We were always wanted to have gone further and faster, but I genuinely believe and can you know, hold my hand up in front of this committee and say I genuinely think that we have produced we will produce an industrial strategy that genuinely offers the opportunity to move the conurbation forward. And then just to pick up on a point Mark made, in some ways I'm quite pleased you haven't learned an awful lot today, because actually that shows we've been doing our job over the last few months of keeping you updated about where we've got to. I would have loved to have shown you the documents today, but unfortunately I've been told by senior people in government that they'd cut my legs off if I did it, basically. So I'm not allowed to share it with you, unfortunately.
I'm conscious of the, I say, time moving on. We've got the mayor coming fairly shortly. So we've got Bob and we've got Karen, and these are the last two questions, quick questions on this particular topic.
Thank you, Chair. No, it's a quick yes or no, actually, John. I mean, I'm assuming that the other two applicants are experiencing the same delay that we have. We're not out of the loop.
Yeah, similar. So I think West Midlands, I think, have more or less agreed there. So they took a different approach to us. So they didn't do as much work on the evidence base. So we're in line with the West Midlands, but Oxford Cambridgeshire one is delayed. So I think they're having some difficulties in pulling that together, because it's quite a complex geography over 6 local enterprise partnership areas. Well, we always took a different approach to the West Midlands. So the West Midlands took their existing evidence base, which they'd developed with their industry partners in years before. I think there's questions about how robust that evidence is and about how much buy-in that will get across government. We always took a view that we needed to do an independent evidence-based development exercise to develop an evidence base which would be credible across government, including with Treasury, to put us in the best position to have an ambitious local industrial strategy which can form the basis of a series of discussions with Treasury over the spending review period, and that's what we've got in place now.
The other, so John's absolutely right in exactly what he says about the evidence base. The other thing is we could have agreed an industrial strategy with government probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, which would have been in line with West Midlands progress. We're holding out with government on certain things that we absolutely believe that this conurbation needs and should have, and that's why there's ongoing conversations to get the right deal or the right industrial strategy rather than a deal, right? Industrial strategy for the conurbation, and that's why actually, we haven't brought it to you today because we're still in that final period of negotiation with government, because it's more important to get it right than to get it done quickly.
Carol.
I just was going to say exactly what Susan said. I think everybody has been working so hard on this, and we do appreciate it, and it will be a thing that's hopefully will be a real crown for us. It doesn't help though when we don't see the portfolio holder. I do think that when it came last month, there was no portfolio holder here. It's come back today, okay, but we need to see that the politicians are engaged in it. And I know you're going to tell me that they are, but we all sit on scrutiny committees and we very rarely see the portfolio holders. So I think it is important, if we are doing scrutiny, that they actually hear what is being said. I know you report back, but it's not the same as actually hearing it from the committee itself. But there's just 2 things. The graphene, right? I'm sorry, I wish it was 30 years old. I think it's 10 years. I thought it was 10 or 14 years. I'm not sure. And it is important that we actually use that. This is such a big plus worldwide, and we really need to be flying the flag out there and doing something if you can take that on board. But I think we also need to understand that our infrastructure is Victorian. Nobody can get about, nobody can get anything. Our sewerage and drains are in terrible conditions. So our infrastructure is Victorian. And the low pay, I have to say, I think I heard somewhere that about 80% of our workforce, or is it for the other way, about 20% are on low pay. So I think it is something that we need to be looking at, is the skills. And yet we need to be saying to the children at an early age, this is what you can achieve. And don't think that you can't achieve it because you live wherever in the centre of Rochdale or Bolton or Salford. I think it is important that we actually give them the wherewithal to do it. So that's the only comments I wanted to make.
So in conclusion, I think we do recognise that the work's been done. It is disappointing that the government hasn't allowed us to actually present the report yet. We are getting it at the next meeting. It is absolutely essential. It's not just me, other people as well, that we ensure that Sir Richard Lees is here for that next meeting. And if there's a problem, perhaps you could speak to me at an early point in time so we can resolve that. We have to get this right. I mean, it's about the future of our people in terms of skills. But if we want this whole region to succeed, it's all about improving as well productivity, which is the theme that comes through here in terms of the report. It's so important. It's an important building block going forwards. And I think you've got the message from the room. We all care about this. We've all got the numbers have got some concerns. We'll take these concerns further forward. We'll scrutinise further, but we do actually recognise the hard work in that as well. The next urgent item is Brexit. But if you could just keep this as short as possible, bearing in mind what is happening at the moment. But we did say we put it on the agenda, but it's, I don't particularly want any questions on it. But I mean, but for noting perhaps. So, Simon.
Committee, you know as much as I do. seriously, I don't think there's anything I can add that you won't have read in the press. I mean, we are in we're in uncharted waters, and who knows exactly what is going to happen next. The only thing I can say is that we are doing the preparation that we believe is sensible to prepare for whatever situation we may face, including looking at, and just had a meeting this morning actually about including if, not saying there will be, but if there were to be some form of economic turbulence and downturn, actually have we got the right people ready to respond to support individuals and companies?
With your indulgence, can we move on? Yeah. Thank you. So on the next part of the agenda, there's the declaration of interest. Any declaration of interest? Good. The minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of February. I've got one very minor change, that within the main body of the report, it was in relation to the charter. It actually said in there that we wanted further information about the implication and costs associated with the charter, but that wasn't actually then reflected in the resolutions. So exactly the same wording that's in the main body of the report is going to go in the resolution to make sure that we actually get that information. So with that one very minor amendment, are you happy to approve the minutes of the previous meeting? Yes. Thank you. The work programme. Sam, is there anything you want to say well, there will be something you want to say on the work programme.
Yes, it's on the work programme for April. We'll be looking at business, science, and the industrial strategy. The GMS annual update will not be coming in April. It will be coming to either the May or June, more likely the June meeting, depending on whether there is a May meeting. And the reason for that is that we've had to put back the work to do that update this time around because of all the work on the industrial strategy. So it's just simply because of resources we've had to shift it back a month.
One thing which I want to raise here, which in a way is not strictly the work programme, but Valerie contacted me on the various projects that were coming out, and it's in relation to some apprenticeship, if you like, allocations across the authorities. And we got this information was put out into the public domain. It was referred to in our previous update on skills at the previous meeting, but with no detail in there. We actually didn't scrutinise the allocation, and I don't think we would do the actual detail, but we should have actually looked at probably, if you like, the criteria used for the allocations. That's gone past now. I gave Valerie the opportunity to do a call-in. After consultation, that was decided that it wasn't needed. But what I've asked for the future reference, that all such allocations do come to this committee for scrutinisation of the criteria used for the allocations. And I think it's important that there is that transparency there, because these things obviously can affect all our individual authorities. And if we want total buy-in, that transparency and openness is, in my judgment, is so important. So that's been taken on board by Simon and the team, and perhaps just for good order, perhaps we could minute that as well, perhaps. Are you happy with that, Valerie? Yes. Good. The next item is... Sorry.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I've got a point on the work programme. I'd be grateful if you and officers would consider somewhere, don't mind where it comes, around local industrial strategy or economy and general business growth. I want to do what Councillor Rakes has raised and look more. You know how we have a title and then we have the dots that give us a sort of subheading? Let's put in there demand side, and let's look around economy, industry. Let's look at productivity, innovation and leadership skills. Let's have one of those subheadings as demand side. I think we should do that. And I actually personally think it would be great if we can do it when Sir Richard Leese, who is hugely busy, I'd love that there when he comes actually, because I think I'd like to hear his views, simply because he's served in the portfolio for such a length of time. That's my view. Thank you.
I think that's a very good idea, actually. I would support that. Are we happy with that?
Yeah.
Thank you. So we've now got the cultural strategy. Unfortunately, the portfolio holder sent her apologies. Was it this morning or late last night? Yesterday afternoon, yeah. Which obviously is disappointing, and because it was such late in the day, I'm led to believe there wasn't an opportunity to get the assistant portfolio holder here, which would have been, preferable. So it's not a happy situation, but I'm sure that the officers are well versed in looking after us and answering all the questions. So over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm aware of the fact that we're probably short of time, so what I'll try and do is keep this really short. This is the second time that you've seen the strategy. We brought a kind of interim draft strategy to you a few months ago as part of the broader consultation that we were doing on it. Your feedback was really helpful, and actually you should find some of those points reflected in the strategy. What I wasn't going to certainly wasn't going to go through the strategy, and to save time, hopefully the report covers the consultation that we've done. I think there is one key point that I would like to raise. The last time we brought it to scrutiny, there was some discussion about where sport is within the Greater Manchester Cultural Strategy, which absolutely is an important point. I think taking that on board and then talking to colleagues, I think if we were to include sport within the Greater Manchester Cultural Strategy, we run the risk of not doing justice to the sports sector and the contribution that sport makes to Greater Manchester, but also runs the risk of diluting the existing cultural strategy. So what we are doing is we are speaking to colleagues at the moment about the potential of how we look to scope out a Greater Manchester sports strategy that's comprehensive enough that we're not just kind of squeezing it into a chapter of the existing culture strategy, but it actually has its own space. If that's okay, I was just going to kind of invite questions to save time, Chair.
I mean, obviously, people should have read the strategy anyway, and it's only a relatively short document, so I think that approach is fine. So, questions?
Given what we discussed about the link with sports, I think it's important then that in your bullet points in 2.7, it might be worth specifically mentioning the link with the sports strategy.
Do you answer? Mark?
Yes, Chair. As I was one of the people that mentioned sport last time, I understood the explanation then. I understand what has just been said now, but I don't agree. And I just want to make that point to be on record. I think sport, specifically football, should be part of it. I notice museums are. I'm not quite sure where that leaves the National Football Museum in the Urbis building now, because that's kind of sport orientated, but is a museum in its own right. And I just think it is a major mistake going forward for us not to recognise the cultural impacts of having two major international football clubs within our remit, not to mention all the others that help enrich the lives of the residents of Greater Manchester. But mine might be a minority view. I accept entirely there's a bit of overlap, and we could have alluded to that. But to just say we're not taking sport as part of this, I believe is a mistake. I also have a concern that in the consultation we do on these kind of things, that there's a lot of talking to ourselves, and when things go up for discussion, it's people with a vested interest, one way or another, who tend to respond. And with that in mind, I would be very interested, not necessarily today, I don't expect you to have it at your fingertips, but in section 2.6 of the introduction, it refers to more than 200 responses to the consultation. I would be extremely interested to know if there is a breakdown available, not just so we can see geographically where they've come from, but are they all people with a vested interest, organisations who are busy applying and therefore felt it useful to respond to the consultation, or is it, you know, the average punter in the street that might go 2 or 3 times a year to the Royal Exchange and once to the Halley? I don't know, but they're all relevant, they're all entitled to a point of view. And coming back to where finishing where I started, Chair, the concern is we spend a lot of time talking to ourselves within this field.
I think your observation there in terms of who responded is absolutely spot on, actually, because I mean you can get a completely different picture depending on who does respond, actually. But
so we've got 70 different videos which are resident. So 70 of that 200 is just resident interviews, and we can share the full thing of that in terms of the online consultation. We've published already all of the responses that came through. So on our online consultation portal, they were published, I think, yesterday. So they have a breakdown of exactly who has, so whether it's an organisation, whether it's a resident, where they come from. So we've got all of that stuff. We had some sector conversations, so we developed it with cultural organisations and with district arts officers. But in terms of that 200, the majority of that 200 are residents. They are not the people who are coming in. No, we've got 70 videos. So we've got 70 video interviews with videos, but then the rest of the consultation, which was the online consultation, and some of the face-to-face events that I had with residents around Greater Manchester as well.
Wouldn't normally, in the normal course of things, be reviewing your online portal consultation or whatever it was. But if you send me a link with a list of who's responded, I'm very interested to have a look at the organisations. Yeah, thank you.
In fact, could you send the link to me as well, actually? It's a very valid point, actually. As regards to sport, I think I don't know what the right answer is, frankly, but you made a judgment call on that, and I mean, personally, I could very much live with that personally, but it's a personal interpretation. Kate,
I've got the right answer. Don't include sport. Sorry, I just had to say something because I can wholly disagree with Councillor Hunter on that, I'm afraid. Having come from an arts background, having been involved in Salford's strategy, which initially hadn't involved sport. Second meeting, it involved sport. It didn't dilute the arts, it drowned the arts. So it's absolutely essential, you know, from an arts background, I am absolutely passionate about that. Do not involve sport. Thank you.
Can I second that? I'm sorry. I don't find sport a culture. I don't find sport a culture. Heritage, arts, the arts, and it's important that we have that soft side. Football is not soft as far as I can see. I know girls play it, and I know they play rugby because I've actually played rugby when I was at college, and I had to have one of those guards and I couldn't talk. So some people might agree that would be better. Just one thing. Again, I have to say, I'm sorry that the portfolio holder is not here. She could be ill, it could be that. But that portfolio holder wasn't here the first time it came. And I'm very concerned, and I'm getting very concerned that portfolio holders are slipping. And I don't think they should be there if they're not prepared to come and talk to us. I don't think it's up to officers to get if we've got any backlash, right, which we don't normally, we're very polite. I think they should be here, I'm sorry, I think they should be here. And I think we've got the opportunity this afternoon to say to Andy, when he comes, we want to see the portfolio holders. We don't want to sit here without the portfolio holders being here. I'm sorry, I don't. I know it's not very wordy, and I'm glad about that. But sometimes I'm sorry, Alison, I missed it a little bit. I didn't see I know you've got the outcomes, but but I don't see where that's going to influence Salford, Rochdale, Bolton, wherever. I don't see. Is that going to come out to us, or, you know, when we will be able to see that within our areas? I just, you know, by 2024, I'm not sure I might be here, but if I am, I'll probably be in a wheelchair or in some nursing home going doolally. And I quite like the art side of that. And I just wondered, with that in mind, where do our homes, our elderly people actually fit into this? And dementia and the singing and things like that. I'd like to just know a little bit more about that. I understand that this is only bullet points, and there probably is a detailed somewhere. Thank you.
So in terms of what that looks like in terms of delivery, so as I'm trying to think now, I think last summer we came to Scrutiny with the Culture and Social Impact Fund, and that's how we will fund activity from 18, so it was, so let me get it right, 17, 18, no, 18, 19 to 19, 20. So that's our 2-year investment package. So what we have, and we're just about to go out with our first year annual report. So that is what has been funded for the first year of that investment. And we have an awful lot of activity around dementia, around health, and we will be able to pull that through. So I think we'll get reports back in May. We'll do the analysis, and then in June or July we'll be able to say what in the first year that has delivered. When we've got agreement on this strategy, we then go out with what the investment approach will look like from 2020 onwards. So how we will invest in the districts. I would say after that, in October to November this year, we will put a call out for applicants who we will fund to do that work. So by the time it gets to April, we'll be rounding up the 2 years funding. So there's a kind of year where we're using activity, but then from 2020 onwards, we will be directly investing in delivery of this strategy, and we'll be able to. So we do have an implementation plan that we're working on at the moment, which pulls out exactly how through the funds that we've already committed through the Cultural and Social Impact Fund, but also some additional work, we are delivering this strategy for the first year, and then the next 4 years, once we've got agreement on budgets, once we've got agreement on the right approach, once we've managed to go out for a call for organisations to deliver the strategy, then we'll be able to be a lot more detailed.
Just picking up on that, actually, and the implementation plan. The one thing that struck me was on the objectives, and they weren't smart objectives again. Well, 1 or 2 of them were, but the majority weren't. I presume that the implementation plan will translate those broad objectives into more specific ones that can be measured and have got the appropriate timeframes and etc.
Absolutely. I think the because of where we are with this strategy, having to cover a year of activity that we've already committed to, we're not really in a place where we've signed contracts with 28 organisations. We can then go and say, we need to change everything that we've agreed to fund you to do. So actually, from the 2020 onwards, so we've got some ways that we can measure that first year. From 2020 onwards, it will be an awful lot smarter, and our investment will be directly linked to delivery of the strategy.
Barry, then Valerie.
Thanks, Chair. I think I was one of the ones last time when we discussed this who also said sport shouldn't be included, partly because it's called the Department of Government, Media and Sport. But that doesn't mean I want to downgrade sport. I think, and in fact, all due respect to the ladies, it's actually more important. When I go abroad and people ask me where I'm from, and I say the Manchester area, people don't say Manchester, oh, the home of the Halley Orchestra. They say, not to me, they don't. They mention one of the two. they mention one of the two Premier football teams, usually accompanied by words like hooligans, but they do mention that it's the football really which is gives us an image, if you like, abroad. So I just wondered, I know I'm not expecting an answer here now, but is somebody doing work on sport? Because it is very, very important. It's actually probably more important than the arts when it comes to the marketing and the general impression of Greater Manchester outside the UK, or even within the UK, but outside the UK in particular. So is there somebody doing work on sport similar to the work on the arts?
Can I just pick that up, Barry? Because I mean, whilst I think broadly your definition is probably what the man in the Clapham omnibus would, or so the person these days in the Clapham omnibus would think what culture is, you're absolutely right. Sport is so important, and as part, presumably, of say our internationalisation strategy, because I mean, I'm like you. You go abroad, and you mention where you're from, and everybody knows Manchester United and Manchester City, and it is important that we pick this. So, Sam, I'm just wondering, how, in that wider context, as it's not part of the cultural strategy per se, what are we going to do about, if you like, maximising the opportunity from the if you like, knowledge, publicity, reputation that we have in not just football teams but other teams as well, actually.
Sorry. So certainly what the intention of being able to separate sport from the culture strategy is not in any way to downgrade the importance of sport. It's actually because it is such a huge area, which is everything from our international profile through to the funding, the money that comes into Greater Manchester on the back of that, to the innovation that's driven through some of those Premiership football and rugby teams, but right the way through to the public health. It's right the way across. And what we didn't want to do is to try and squeeze it into something, and absolutely, as Councillor Lewis says, the risk is you end up overwhelming one side or the other. So it kind of felt so important that we needed to be able to consider that in its own right.
I think the point that Barry's making is that this opportunity on promoting and utilising the brand image that you've got is going to be part of either our industrial strategy or the overall strategy, because clearly it's not within the cultural strategy.
I think I'll just say something quickly. I think what I would like to see is, I mean, at the moment, we haven't started the work bringing together. So in terms of us understanding across Greater Manchester, the number of boxing clubs, the number of cricket clubs, the number of rugby league, the number of rugby union, we haven't started pulling together that. And so we're not in a position to move forward. We had that with culture, and we had a kind of a way of working across Greater Manchester before. Now we've got Greater Sport, and we currently invest in Greater Sport, and they do some of that strategic role and some of that evidence and research base. But in terms of a strategy for sport in Greater Manchester, what does that look like from grassroots and boxing clubs all the way through to those big international moments? And I think that what you would see, or what we would like to see, is that you have the culture strategy, you have an approach to sport that might be a Greater Manchester sport strategy, and then the internationalisation strategy would sit over it for those really big moments. The health and social care would sit over it for where there are health benefits for our residents in the same way. So it absolutely needs to be done, but it needs to be done right, so it's impactful and so it's not just squodged onto a page, I think.
The Mayor's arrived.
Apologies for being late, Chair.
We've got one last question on culture. Can you just deal with that very quickly, and then it's over to your presentation.
Okay.
Or your update, I should say.
Okay, no problem. No, please carry on with it. It's important to hear from Marie-Claire.
I admire the level of ambition in this. can I just perhaps note a note of caution? On your page 24, we talk about what success will look like in 2024. An increase, one of which is an increase in uptake of cultural subjects at GCSE. Given all the pressures in from the Department for Education that really mitigate strongly against this, what are we going to do to try to achieve this?
So we have some really interesting...
Can I just add to that? I had a different, if you like, spin on that. That, you know, I understand why to promote the strategy you need to have more people taking these subjects. But if you look at the whole, right, if you take more in culture, you might be taking less in STEM. And STEM, to me, is just, if not even more important. So you've got a difficult balancing act there, actually.
I think the first point, we have some really interesting relationships with an organisation called Curious Minds, who get money from Arts Council through DFE, and we're working really closely to co-invest in strategies that get culture into schools, and that is either from having training up teachers to better understand the benefit of creative education. So that is growing, and our activity is growing in that area. And I think that gets to that point, which is actually the learning of a creative subject isn't just to create an artist. It isn't just to create a musician. It's all of the other things that play into the creativity that's in the industrial strategy. So it's not one or the other. It's if we can increase the uptake and the understanding of the value within schools of a creative education, we can then start to value creativity in science, in innovation, across all of the other things as well. So that, I mean, yes, it's a challenge, but it's also useful for us to be able to take that to schools and say, this is Greater Manchester's ambition. Nobody else is saying that they have this ambition, and rather have that and not meet it by a few points than not try, I think.
Thank you for your input, and thank you for your report.
Thank you. Sorry.
I'm sorry, we're stopping there, right? Because the mayor's here on a restricted time frame.
Sorry.
So we need to do it. That's why I've truncated it. Sorry, Fred, but I don't like stopping questions, you know. Andy, so if you can give us your update on things, and then we'll obviously take some questions.
I will. Thank you, Chair, and apologies for being a bit late.
We were forewarned.
Okay, yeah. Good. Well, thank you. Update. Well, there's a lot to update on. There's a lot happening, isn't there, right now? I suppose, though, let's start with the national situation. That remains obviously difficult, to say the least, without going into all the details. But the reason I reference it is just because it makes it all the more important that Greater Manchester has clarity in terms of direction, however that plays out. Lots of councils around the table have been at MIPIM this week, and I think that came through very strongly. I mean, sometimes people might question, should we be there? And obviously it's a sort of a big high-end gathering, etc. But it kind of came over that it was important to be there, because obviously, you know, what image are we projecting right now as a country? If we're not careful, we're projecting an image of turning inwards, going narrow, and we can't. You know, we now need to be out there with clarity in terms of what we feel we're all about, where we're going, where the opportunities are. And I think that's what was behind what we did at the start of this year with the future of Greater Manchester, you know, the rewritten spatial framework. But then alongside it, other complementary initiatives that you've been hearing about. I know that John's taken you through the local industrial strategy and where we're up to on that. But that, of course, sits alongside the redrafted spatial framework. So the way I've been describing this is, you know, if you think of Media City and Sports City, Airport City today, think Graphene City, Tech City, Health City. You know, we need to start really putting some detail behind where our future industrial ambitions lie and be very specific about those. So those two things very much sit together. And then you look at another complementary thing, which is the Green Summit, which is now just over a week away, where the proposal is we commit to 2038 as the date for carbon neutrality. Now, the thing that's kind of becoming quite interesting about that is, I certainly got the sense when we did a session on this question about Greater Manchester going ahead of the rest when it comes to carbon neutrality, which is effectively what we would be doing. Through conversations with Bristol this week, it transpired that their 2030 doesn't really add up, to be honest, as far as I can see. And you know what we've got, we're the only place here with a thought-through plan to go early. And Councillor Ganotis has developed a 5-year delivery plan, which members of the committee may have seen. You know, this is saying yes, we're going 2038, but it starts right now, and that then starts to give some real meaning, I think, to the local industrial strategy, so that the environmental issue turns from being a burden agenda to a sort of economic benefit agenda. And I think we're on the cusp of that change at the moment. If you then look at, say, the health issue, because health will feature prominently in the local industrial strategy, as you've probably just heard from John. That then links to our kind of whole journey around how we're using devolution to change the way public services work and continue this drive towards place-based preventative public services, working as one team effectively, that is very much about promoting the health of the public in everything that it seeks to do. Linking health with housing and all of those things. So the reason I'm just going through this is because I think there's a set of complementary things here that are kind of working together, and the GM jigsaw is slowly, I hope you feel this, I'll be interested to hear back from you whether you do or not, but we've slowly put more and more pieces down in this jigsaw that are starting to become quite a convincing big picture, I hope. The bit then to play into that is skills and young people. Obviously, knife crime has been a big issue since I last spoke to the committee chair. I think some of our thinking around young people does play into this whole question. We, like other big cities, have an issue where a percentage of young people are given real clarity by the education system, but possibly a majority are not. And actually, the conversation that was just happening before around creativity in the curriculum is a case in point. You know, some things have been sort of deprioritised, whereas others have been, but it's left a lot of young people without a sense of where they fit in. So I kind of feel that too is an increasingly important part of this picture. So we are on with developing what we call the Opportunity Pass, which is a big commitment of mine, which I'm sure maybe committee members will want to ask about. But I don't see how we can achieve what John was describing to you in terms of our big picture ambitions for the Greater Manchester economy unless we are doing much more to help young people see their place within that economy and plot a course for them from where they are now to where they hope to be. I don't know if Chris was there that day, but I was in one of the academies, the Oasis Academy in Oldham, you know, up on the hill there, you know, with a perfect view of the city centre. And it was kind of interesting. I was talking to them about the Opportunity Pass. And the message I was trying to give to them, and it really brought it graphically home. I said, look, you can see the city centre from your school hall. But I said, I bet some of you think that that's a world that's not really for you. I said, well, we'll only be the Greater Manchester if we want to be, if all of you feel that you could confidently walk into those new skyscrapers and have a career there. And if we're honest with ourselves, we're not there yet at the moment. I don't think that is how we are. But that's where we want to be, that any young person anywhere in our 10 boroughs could look at the city centre and kind of feel that's their world too, as opposed to it being like it's an intimidating world that they don't know anything about. So I kind of feel what we've got to kind of focus on as much as any of the other agendas now is around skills and young people. I think, you know, there's a bit of a discussion going on with the government. I don't know how much John touched on it. You know, there's still a difference of opinion, actually, about skills devolution. The governments are still, I wouldn't say it's the government as a whole, because I think there are different voices with it, depending which minister you're talking to, but I think the establishment, or like, if you like, the civil service, are still quite resistant to skills devolution, whereas I'm increasingly of the view that it is critical to the success of our industrial strategy and our industrial ambitions, and without that bit, we're not going to make ourselves a place that is up there, because obviously one of the messages that came through MIPIM is, you know, you could talk all you like about the sites that you've got and the ambitions that you've got, unless you can demonstrate a talent pipeline, a skills pipeline, you might struggle to attract those international investors, because that, in the end of the day, is what they are most interested in. And you know, I think we've got to crack that if we're to really achieve everything that we want to. So I suppose I'll leave it there, Chairman. That's the big picture update in terms of where we are. I'll finish where I started. Whatever happens in the next few days, weeks, and I think we're all sort of in the dark about that, I have a hope that coming out of this, the government is going to have to turn here and say, right, help us now to really sort of inject some renewed momentum and confidence into the forward direction of the country. And I don't think that can be driven from Whitehall. I have a hope that when people sort of emerge from the bunker of Brexit, they're going to find it's, oh God, you know, we need to do, and we need to be ready to go as Greater Manchester. We need the plans on the table to say, right, well, fine, you know, here we go. You know, we've got a direction, and now we need you to embrace it. But it does mean devolution going deeper and faster on those critical issues of skills, training, transport, as we know, and also young people. So that would be my update in terms of where we are right now. I think we've made massive strides forward, actually, in the first 3 months of this year, or first 2.5 months. But we need to turn those, the kind of big words, if you like, and the big visions into practical benefit.
I'll throw out a question in 1 second, but I want to indulge for a second, because I agree with you entirely, actually, about devolution of education. We've debated it before today, actually. I had a chat with Simon about it. We express our concerns about, you know, the skills agenda, how I've been a councillor for 13 years. When I first became a councillor, it was on the agenda there, and we haven't delivered. And I'm absolutely with you. It is so important that if we want to get, you know, our young people, you know, who are in poverty at the moment, out of poverty, we have opportunities to grow this region, to improve the productivity of this region. We have to get the skills right, both in terms of as I think Susan Howard made the point, I think, both in terms of what our people want, but also what the employers want as well. So it is, yeah, absolutely spot on.
It's, if I could just say, it's great to hear you say that, and I think this is actually recognised cross-party, certainly out of Westminster. Andy Street I was with this week, and we were having, and we do often have the same conversation. It's not talking out of turn to say that this is the sticking point, the biggest sticking point. I think, did John touch on this? You know, with the government when it comes to agreeing the local industrial strategy. At the end of the day, there always has to be a compromise, doesn't there? But if we could have your help in making that case as collaboratively as we could, in terms of saying, look, this is what we all want, then I think that would strengthen our arm. Yep.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. The Mayor made, and he made reference to the Greater Manchester Industrial Strategy quite a few times. We did obviously discuss it before John introduced the report, and there were a lot of questions about it. A couple of things I think you should know and are worth repeating now that you're here with us. One is that there was at least a little bit of disappointment that we weren't further on with this, recognising that government is the key partner in this, and that the reasons for the delay weren't all down to the combined authority. But the presentation today didn't actually tell us a great deal that we weren't already aware of. We're now told it's going to come back in a more detailed format in April, and the view was expressed by the chair and others that we would then have the portfolio holder present, and that's a wider concern because we've had a few reports recently where the portfolio holder, including today, hasn't managed to be present. So I think it's important you hear that directly. But secondly, as part of going on to your point about the skills pipeline and the point which I've heard you make before about when you visited the school in Oldham and you looked at how kids have got to be able to access the city centre, and you're quite right about all that. I think this committee has supported the industrial strategy several times over and made it clear that we do agree cross-party on its importance. But again, because you're here now, you should know that earlier on we heard directly from John and others about the increase in skills and qualifications that we've experienced across the conurbation was not reflected in any increase in productivity, and we also heard that in some instances it's because the wrong training was being provided. I don't believe for a moment you do underestimate the scale of the challenge with this, but I do think you should be aware that that was a part of the conversation we had just an hour before you walked through the room. And on a different point, Chair, just very briefly, MIPIM, I appreciate it takes a long time for these contacts and things to materialise, but I'm interested if you could just say to the committee the overarching mood of the people you spoke to, the international investors and everything who were there, bearing in mind what's going on in Westminster, and frankly whether or not did that have any bearing on this year compared to last year in terms of people expressing interest in the opportunities that exist in Greater Manchester, or I understand why we have to present ourselves as business as usual, but it seems to me that's a bit of a thankless task given the shambles in Westminster.
I do. Thank you, Mark. I think on the first point, we want to get this document right. So if it's dragging a little or it's not as far as I think that's, I would say, worth getting the delay to. This is crucial. This document, because for the first time, we've been an attractive place to invest, but it's quite a different thing all of a sudden to be saying, and these are the things where we are actively saying we want to be world leading. It's quite a big step forward, I think. So do it knowing that you've got the wherewithal to deliver it, and that's why the skills thing is rightly not. We're not. There was pressure, I think, to go early and publish. I think West Midlands might be publishing next week. I'll be direct with you. My advice back to the team was we're not going to do that until we've got a better deal on skills, because there's no point going out there to the world if then you can't say, well, and here's how we're going to bring through the next generation to work in those industries. Your point about productivity and are we training people in the right things? Well, this is no criticism of any individual college, but I think institutions may be thinking about what's right for them to do as opposed to what's right for, There's still a disconnect, isn't there, between the economy and how those institutions work. And it was interesting, I was at the London Stock Exchange of all places last week with a GM startup, North Coders. I don't know if you're aware of this company. They began in 2015 at the Sharp project. They're a digital retraining company, and they were announced Business of the Year by the National British Chambers of Commerce because it's recognised that they've had phenomenal growth in that period of time. Their graduates have a sort of 96% success rate. They get a job within 2 weeks. And they are, I don't know if you realise this, but Jaguar Land Rover have just taken a big digital space in the city centre. They are feeding companies like that with talent. And it kind of says to me that is, though I was pleased to celebrate their success with them, it does illustrate a little, doesn't it, how the private sector is having to pick up a gap in the education system and then is sort of filling that very successfully. So, I agree with you, but we need more of that. We need the North Coders thing, but on a much more sort of ambitious and and often public sector driven approach. In terms of MIPIM, there was a couple of things just to reflect on. There was definitely a feeling out there that it's not why London, if you know what I mean, in terms of where we are now as a country. The case for investing in London has kind of diminished somewhat, I think, with the way things are. You know, increasingly the word was that, you know, Manchester is seen as the opportunity, and I was told by a number of people that we are the place that most people are looking at because of what we offer in many ways in terms of clarity about what we're trying to do, and a good place to invest. The danger is increasingly there's a blight growing now on investment decisions because of the national situation, and that was mentioned numerous times by people, that people are holding back because of the lack of national progress. So I think it's a good success story up to this point, but we're hitting the point where real damage could be done. But our stand out there was much more heavily patronised than I think any of our counterparts. I'll be honest with you, it was not my natural habitat, but I think having been, I kind of feel it was right to be there. Particularly at this moment in time with all of this, we had to project an image of confidence and forward direction, and the Manchester team, led by Sir Richard, who was effectively leading the delegation, absolutely projected that, and I think we're in a strong position as of today, but it is very linked to the national conclusion of the national negotiations. I think. A working deal now we need, and I think we need it pretty desperately. I would say.
Can I just mention one thing that you didn't really specifically address on Mark's point, which I understand why, but Mark did mention the fact that the concern we've got as a committee that we don't have enough of the portfolio leads coming to our meetings.
Sorry, Chair, I should have.
I mean, I don't want to debate now, but if within the team you could perhaps do what you can do to encourage them to attend the meetings.
I will emphasise the point to all portfolio holders.
So Susan next, then Kate.
Thanks, Chair. I want to ask you about this challenging, and for some of us we would describe it as unacceptable shift for funding, and not funding very well, services here in Greater Manchester. So the shift, of course, from Exchequer funding to council tax funding, which of course we feel is regressive and a lot less fair. So two things about that. One is, I mean, we've got this government, elected government, and that's why that's happening. So do you have a good enough feel for how that's going to impact the Greater Manchester economy, the people, how that change is impacting there? So, for example, we know council tax goes towards funding police more and goes towards funding adult care services, for example, as an example now. And then, of course, the second part of that I would ask is there anything we can actually do? So as a city region, can we do anything, or are we wholly boxed in on such big impact, really, on changes around finance and how it affects our people while we've got this national government? Is there anything that can be done around political negotiation or fight back? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. So I agree with you very strongly about the burden of taxation increasingly falling on the council tax. I don't think it is. It's bearing unsustainable weight, I would say, at the moment. So we had the consideration here around the police precept. If I summarise what the GM Public are asking me for, I think I would say it's more police, number one, and then better buses, number two. I might be wrong. I mean, you might see it slightly differently, but that's as I see it. So we took the difficult decision to create proposals on both that deliver that through this year's asks from the GMCA point of view with regards to the council tax. But then that leaves obviously the fire service in a very difficult position, and you'll know that we're going through a difficult process with the fire service in terms of refocusing, repurposing, and that we're on with that. But it starts to illustrate to you, if you're funding the police, you can't do everything, can you? That way, you really cannot. And And I think that message does have to go back. I hope cross-party back to the government. You know, this I didn't myself think it was appropriate for the tax thresholds to be changed for income tax purposes when, you know, at the time when, you know, we aren't putting that funding into local government. And it's like it's, you know, national government is trying to get the benefit for looking like it's cutting people's taxes, when it's actually then saying to councils, well, and you're the bad guys because you're going to have to raise all the money. And it's always been there to a degree, but it does feel that that's very much the situation at the moment. In terms of fight back, I mean, I think there is quite a strong fight back, if you like, in terms of what police and crime commissioners are doing jointly, councils of all political persuasions are doing around council funding. You know, it's almost deafening, I guess, you know, the messages that's coming out. The question is obviously getting some response to that. We have a comprehensive spending review looming. So rather than it being just on issue by issue, I think we need to think as GM, how do we handle the comprehensive spending review? This is the moment where you can change these things. And I would be very, very interested in any cross-party approach to that, because then I think we're in a stronger position to actually get some change. I think there has to be a new settlement for local government, and we've seen school head teachers in recent days changing their approach. I think we need to sort of work as one, really, to say, well, what is a much fairer settlement for public services from here, and the more we do that with maybe other combined authorities, if we agree what we want to and then do it jointly with other combined authorities, or indeed through something that will be repeated this year called the Convention of the North. We had a first go at it last year. It was successful as far as it went, but I feel this year's event could be much more powerful post any Brexit resolution and pre a spending review. I think the Convention of the North this year could be a real moment where, if we do it in the right way, as I say, not just cross-party, but with business leaders alongside us, that will be the moment to land some very big messages about how things have got to change in terms of the funding of public services and the regional funding that we need.
Thank you. I think we've been a little bit at risk today of blaming the lack of skills or the wrong skills for the lack of productivity, and I just wanted to get your thoughts around what other reasons there are for the poor productivity, because my understanding is it is partly to do with businesses not having the confidence to invest. Obviously that has something around Brexit, but it's also to do with the banking sector really not providing what people need in the Northwest and in GM. And there are real issues, I know, for businesses trying to get that investment. And I just wondered really what were you thinking around that? What was your understanding of, how developed is your understanding of what business needs are in terms of investment? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Kate. I mean, the thing that could most drive productivity, I think, is, let's say, better employment for people. I would say more secure employment, employment that more recognises people's home situation, so more flexible, but also that invests as well in people in terms of progression. The Independent Prosperity Review, commissioned by Sir Richard, I don't know if you saw it, but it very much goes deep into these issues and recognises that productivity remains a very big challenge for Greater Manchester. It talks of health of people being a big barrier, and I think mental health within that is part of it. But people's poor mental health is a reflection sometimes of poor employment and poor employment circumstances. So I think these are very, very big issues for us, and the Prosperity Review highlighted them, and it also highlighted one of our potential solutions, which is the Good Employment Charter. So you'll know that we're in the final stages now of agreeing a good employment charter for Greater Manchester. It's intended as much to help people as to be a means to improve productivity. I think most employers in Greater Manchester are good employers, but they probably some of them will need more of a steer as to how they could be even better employers. But there is a tail of those who are not good employers, and they do need to be challenged, I think, and challenged more directly. So I would point you towards that really as the big intervention that we've got coming that could make a difference in this space. And I would encourage you to ask individual councils to sort of be a part of this as well, because if we develop a good employment charter that everyone can say, well, that's, you know, I think we're pretty much there. I think we are in terms of the content of it. If every public body in Greater Manchester were to say, we will only now procure from people who have achieved this or are on the way to achieving it, I think that would be powerful in terms of changing some of the way in which employment practice works across GM. So if it, let's just say it was GMCA plus the 10 councils plus GMP plus the NHS, that is that shifts behaviour, I would say. So that would be the main thing that I would point towards. I think you're right to suggest that the banking industry sometimes doesn't help some of our smaller to medium-sized enterprises, just with its short-termism or its failure to invest and not for the long term, and those are issues we should pick up too. But that, I think, is the biggest thing that we could do collectively to make a difference with regards to productivity. Transport as well, but maybe I'll answer that in response to another question.
Kate actually chairs the one of our task and finish groups, actually on the employment charter. So I don't know if you want to say anything extra about that.
Just to say, we're very optimistic about it, and we're very hopeful about the impact that it can have. And and in terms of what you were saying about going back to our local authorities and seeing how we can encourage the take up there, I know it's something that's we hold very dearly in Salford. We had our own employment charter, which has influenced the GM one. And so, for example, we were talking about how when somebody comes with a planning application, can we make expectations of them to adopt the employment charter? So, absolutely, we do like it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of very quick responses. I think you're absolutely right. The more we can, it's this whole question about commissioning for social value, isn't it? And we've nibbled at it maybe, and I know some authorities may have done more of it than others, but having a much bigger focus on that, I think, is something we need to do collectively. Also, though, Liverpool City Region, I think it's fair to say, have adopted parts of what we're doing with our draft charter, and they're developing something pretty similar. Given that many GM companies have that wider northwest footprint, if the two city regions are doing something that's broadly similar, and you start building it out in that way, then I think it starts to become quite powerful as a sort of bottom-up vehicle to change business culture. And as I say, I don't think 80 or 90% of our businesses are resistant. They probably need more of a nudge, maybe in some areas than others. But I think it then is better at then saying, well, who are the companies that really need to be challenged? And it's worth me just saying, I recommend to you all, I think it was a report, John may know more if I've got this wrong, but I think the Resolution Foundation did a piece of work recently on the back of the Independent Prosperity Review, which looked at this question of low pay, low skill culture. And it found that actually a pretty small number of large employers are responsible for a big part of our problem. It didn't name them, did it, in the report, but it basically said, I think, 5 or 6 employers are responsible for a massive part of our problem. And obviously, if the charter can really go towards them, then we could make quite a big difference. Do you want to say something, John?
Oh yeah, I mean, just to add about the work they've done, suggests that it's about 5 employers account for a huge proportion of the low-paid workforce. Some of those are in the public sector, so some of the big public sector employers, but also but the big supermarkets, some of the big manufacturers. So whilst we don't name them, it's actually quite easy to work out who they are. And I think once the good employment charter is in place, it should be relatively straightforward to start having conversations with those firms.
In terms of, I mean, you went through, Andy, all the items like the health and the Green Summit, but all these, I would suggest, are dependent on the income that the Northern Powerhouse will generate from the industrial strategy. If we get that right, it brings money into the region. So it is probably one of the most important, the most important programme that you've got lined up. So we've been told, obviously, that we can't see it this time, that it's ongoing, etc. Can you reassure us that once, God willing, central government okay it, that we're ready to shoot off with it on that? So for that reassurance. And secondly, I mean, in terms of our productivity, I mean, it's not your fault. I mean, historically, the North has always been... Listen, I'm a Conservative, I've got to blame you for something. But I mean, it is historically, and the North has always lagged behind productivity in the South. And it's something that we have to improve. And in terms of the skills, have you got plans, for instance, and the problem with our FEs are always based, everything's based around Ofsted and the Ofsted inspectors coming in, and it's all about doing the right courses in order to achieve the right results, etc. But have you got plans to meet up with the FE schools, and once your plan is publicly known, and say, look, this is our plan, these are the skills, bring the heads of these FEs within the Greater Manchester area on board and say, you know, please, this is what we need from you, and just put aside your own personal ambitions and help us to achieve what we want to achieve in the Northern Powerhouse.
Well, I do, Bob. Well, thanks for your point, because it's a very important one. I think this is what lies behind why we are we're not giving in easy on skills. I think is because we feel this is desperately needed. I've long had this view that English education policy under all governments has been very, very skewed towards the university route. And it's left a large gap that's getting bigger for those not on that route. And it's becoming less clear to those young people where education takes them. And I think that this is where devolution, I think, comes into its own. Can it correct things that are not done properly by the old top-down Whitehall? Because if it can, that's really then shows why it's worth having. And I think in the whole world of skills, which is never going to be done well, I don't think, from a national level, because it's so remote from the reality of our economy. It'll be better done if it's more driven by the real economy. So I've been arguing, to pick up your point, I mean, it's good that the FE colleges are working more as a GM body. That's a good step forward. They're not working institutionally, if you like, anymore. They are beginning to work more collectively, which is good, I think. I've argued, and we are making some progress on the idea of a UCAS-style system for apprenticeships. So the idea being, you give young people who want technical qualifications the same information about where they go beyond school as university students get. To my slight frustration, given that it was my idea, Merseyside have already introduced theirs, which I won't go, never mind. But still, it kind of suggests that it's a good idea, and actually if it has more of a northwest reach, that's not necessarily a bad thing. So I remain very committed to that idea. So you create a GM structure that then these organisations can sort of fit within. Because if everyone sees all the apprenticeships that are out there across the 10 boroughs, the schools and the colleges then can start to say to kids at age 13, 14, why don't you think, have you recognised this? Have you seen what's out there? And then it, of course, allows business the opportunity to drive the system more. So the UCAS system, in many ways, helps us regionalise the education system without even government coming in and giving us devolution. You know what I mean? It just does it in a more voluntary way, if you like, rather than it being imposed. So I agree with you very strongly. I think these are the challenges that we've got to rise to. And it becomes really clear once you've got the local industrial strategy in place. Because if we are saying that the digital economy is one of our big four, which it is, I'm going to say that, you'll then see all the apprenticeships in that space, won't you? And you'll be able to sort of identify the opportunities in that sector of the economy, or advanced manufacturing, whatever else will it be. And you really start to join the dots in a way that I don't think as a country we've ever managed to do before. So this is mission critical, I think, for us. I mean, the other side of productivity is transport, and again, transport is, I think, our biggest weakness as a region. If keep coming back to that, but it is. I think we'll get there on skills. I think we'll get there in terms of our thinking on the industrial strategy, reform of public services. The one that's the biggest unknown at the moment is how we're going to get where we need to be on transport, and that does affect productivity, because the average commute in Greater Manchester, I guess, has grown significantly in the last couple of years, and that does affect business productivity.
Thank you for coming and talking to us. You recognise from my nameplate that the school that you went to admire the skyscrapers in Greater Manchester was in Oldham. And one concern that comes up from time to time in our meetings is a worry that the centre of Manchester, and especially the southern part of the Greater Manchester area, are receiving a disproportionate share of resources. What can we do to make sure that there is clarity about the basis of some of the decisions that are made, clarity about allocation criteria that really should come to this scrutiny committee and was absent, I'm afraid, from your recent decision about allocating apprenticeship funding to support small businesses? It's not clear in each case how these decisions are being made and what role boroughs like Oldham can play to develop their own skyscrapers so people might not have to commute into Manchester.
Just to add that, Andy, we debated this beforehand. It was something that was obviously missed off, that really should have come certain sort of criteria to this committee. So we have minuted that in future, all such decisions in terms of the criteria should be, where appropriate, obviously depending on what our remit is, should come to this committee. But it's a very valid point that Valerie made, and she ran me up about it last week, and I think it's important that things are done properly. And well, they are done properly. I won't say that's the wrong word to use. From a transparency point of view, if you want to get buy-in from all of the 10 authorities, it's important that there is that openness and transparency there. I'm not saying it isn't there, but the trouble is when you don't see these things, you can't be absolutely sure.
Very fair point. Maybe it needs to be set down more clearly in criteria, but all I can say in response to Valerie is that in every decision I make, I am, that is number one. Is this geographically, if any fund that we're allocating, is this fair across the 10? And that's the leaders, whenever we meet to discuss these things, will always do challenge on that, and rightly so. So perhaps it's too much unwritten. Maybe it needs to be more explicit in terms of our criteria when we are allocating funds across GM. But so that's a very fair point, and it's one we'll take on board. In terms of north-south, the GMSF is out there, as we know, and it's being debated upon. I mean, it's very explicit in that GMSF that part of its intent is to address our own north-south divide. So we have our own north-south divide within GM that we often talk about nationally. So, there are sites in there, and most notably the Northern Gateway, which is being promoted and has been promoted this week as perhaps the major investment opportunity in terms of some of these new industries that we're talking about. So it's not just about distribution or warehousing. This is about higher value, forward-facing industries. And it follows then, of course, that the infrastructure funding is going to have to follow that. If we are saying that is one of our prime sites, we're going to have to back that up with the infrastructure to make it a viable possibility. So I absolutely take on board your point, but there is a serious intent around rebalancing GM, which is what I think I would expect we have to do. But part of it too, though, is that opportunity pass, which is saying, every borough can't have everything, I think, and therefore creating a system where everybody can travel everywhere is part of a way of addressing that. And to get to your point about why can't Oldham have the same skyscrapers, I mean, I think, pardon? I didn't mean the same. No, the same. No, okay, yeah, no, your own. I think you can but this was a theme in MIPIM this week. So Stockport presented to investors on the Mayoral Development Corporation, which I attended as well to support Stockport. I think this is genuinely innovative, what's being done there. And here's where it might get a bit more difficult, but I think this is a new vision of the town, not necessarily as an employment centre, but as a high-quality residential centre. And some people might claim that makes it a dormitory town. I don't, that phrase I think needs to be rethought because it's too negative. I think rethinking some of our proud towns as places where quality places for people to live is actually quite an attractive vision. And the old idea of all GM towns having their own major industry is probably one that's not realistic anyway anymore. But making them connected to the places where there is industry so that people can have a high quality living space connected to the centres of employment. The truth is cities around the world are becoming the magnets for the new economy, and that's just the reality. And it's not just happening here, it's happening everywhere. But then how do you then knit the outlying areas into those places with good public transport, affordable public transport, but then also make those places really attractive places to live? And I think the Stockport sort of test, if you like, test case, I better not say it in this forum, but I've already got the second bid. I won't name who it's from, but I've got the second bid for a Mayoral Development Corporation for a town centre. So, and I want the boroughs around this table to form that queue, really. I want it. To me, it doesn't have to just be one on its own. I would like more. And I think we're beginning to get into the real nitty-gritty here of rethinking Oldham, Stockport. Bolton, I think, are on the verge of announcements around, not necessarily not done by the vehicle of an MDC, but through many of their own efforts. I think they're on the verge of sealing some very significant investment into, I think Farnworth is beginning to move forward as well. So I don't know if it's controversial to say that some of our towns will need to be more, high quality residential spaces, not necessarily major employment centres, but that could be quite an attractive future for some of our outlying towns. And maybe it does need to be combined with not necessarily major employers or major building skyscrapers. I think what we do see is a need for more flexible startup space in our towns, because I think with the way the city centre is going, the cost of property is probably going beyond the reach of some of those smaller. So can we then look to Oldham to say, well, could you have a startup space, within some of our outlying towns, so that then you build an ecosystem across the city region where you've got a range of affordable business accommodation in all areas. So this is where we're at, isn't it? New thinking. But I want to put on record today, I think that the Stockport example, I think is very, very, the work they've done is brilliant. I think we all need to help them succeed with it, because it could create a new template that everyone might be able to then use in Greater Manchester.
Before we finish this session, because I'm conscious of your time, and also we've got a few other items we need to get through. Thanks for coming. Thanks for being open and sharing your thoughts with us. Look forward to seeing you again in 6 months' time. I think that's important. We have regular updates. But I've got one question actually to finish off with. And you mentioned Bristol actually as an authority, and I guess it's their green policies. Because out of the blue last night, actually, I was looking to change my energy supplier. And Bristol Corporation came up. So I just saw on Which magazine. So I thought, what's this all about? Yeah. And they've obviously got a green energy sort of company that they've set up when they're selling energy across the whole of the country. And so my thought then was to what extent are we doing anything like that? And if we're not doing anything, are we being innovative enough?
God, yeah, that focuses the mind somewhat, doesn't it? If we're all lining the coffers of Mayor Marvin down in Bristol. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know, possibly not. So we've got the Green Summit coming up, and I hope that that's the kind of place where we can be a bit more ambitious and a bit more innovative. I know Councillor Jabbar from Oldham has made a very strong pitch around a GM energy company investing in renewables, and we've made some progress. I was just leaning towards Simon because I wasn't quite sure where it's up to, but it's still moving forward. Go on, Simon.
So we're still looking at the issue, and it'll come up at the Green Summit as one of the things that we need to examine further. And I think there's the first stage probably would be to look at the public sector estate and look at how the opportunities for generating more renewable electricity from the public estate, and then almost build out from there. But it's still very much still under active consideration.
I think it's absolutely where we should be thinking, and I don't know whether we need to become more, interventionist generally in this space. The clean air proposals are another opportunity where we could. I like the idea of investing ourselves in electric vehicle charging points, and eventually charging for the use of them, because then that could be a revenue stream for TFGM, so it's almost like we become the new suppliers of the new petrol stations. Or why do we let others go in and provide that? Why don't we get in and do some of it ourselves, and therefore create a funding stream? Because why should it be free? I mean, I know we've been making it free to try and encourage people to switch to electric vehicles, but going forward, it's reasonable, I think, to ask people to pay for the use of those things. And if we are, why don't we collect the revenue from that rather than let others come in and take it instead? So I think you're right. I mean, we're going to need to be innovative. I think it goes back to Councillor Howard's point about finance, and if we're not going to get all the finance we need from central government, starting to be more creative, more innovative about how we raise it ourselves. I mean, the airport is the classic, isn't it? Going back, GM had ambition around the airport and what it might mean for the 10 councils. There's been talk of a tourist tax. I don't know what people feel about that, but that's still something that I think Edinburgh are trying to do at the moment. We paid it all. I paid it yesterday as we were leaving France. So I think all of those things are things that we're going to increasingly have to think about, and I think they are. The country, I think, needs to get into devolution properly now and free us up to become much more entrepreneurial in the way we think and the way we work, and become more independent in terms of our own finances. So, yeah, I will check out the Bristol Energy company. I think Nottingham have one, do they not? Robin Hood Energy. So, yeah, we may be missing a trick, Chair. So maybe we need to up our game. So.
Thank you once again.
No, thank you.
It is appreciated.
And I will take the point back about attendance and reiterate that. So thank you, Mark.
So we're on to the agenda. What I want to do, we've got turbocharging gender equality. I want to delay that until the end because that's not time critical. Whereas the works and skills updates and the Part B is more time critical. So if that's okay with you, then it's over the works and skills update, which is Gemma, HMT Skills Pilot, and then the GM Careers Application Platform. We are tight on time, so can I make a suggestion that we assume that people have read the papers, and therefore, unless there's any really startling points you want to raise, then we'll just do questions.
Okay, so as the Chair has said, if we assume that the papers are read, I'm just happy to take questions. I've obviously been watching, so I know you've had a lot of conversation about skills, about devolution, about how we respond to employer needs, how we respond to young people. And actually, I think these three papers set out a really, really good way that we are trying to use devolution and some of the powers and influence that we do have to connect those dots. So I will happily take questions on the skills pilots and on the career portal, which the chair mentioned, the mayor mentioned. Merseyside haven't gone first. We already had what they have. So actually, what this paper sets out is something bolder and bigger, and really does give clear line of sight for all young people. So I just wanted to make sure that that was minuted.
Thank you very much. I'll just, skills pilot paper first. It's just one question really. So on page 68 it highlights of course that it talks about wanting to be supportive of those that have been or are excluded from existing business startup and business support activity. So I thought about that and I thought perhaps one of the issues might, if you could tell us what that covers, you know, what are typical exclusion issues. So it suggested to me that one might be those with some sort of possible criminal history. And actually, I know that we don't at all scrutinise that area. That's with corporate scrutiny, the whole business of what we do around probation and justice in Greater Manchester. But, I mean, you know, there is a support system for rehabilitation, you know, that people want to have better lives. So if you could say anything about that, because in a sense it can be harder for people with any sort of background, I'm afraid, with a conviction. And actually we know that to get employed, but we know that one avenue has been to start up and do something for themselves. So if you can say anything about that to me, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. So in terms of the self-employment pilot that you talk about there, it's predominantly the criteria that it's talking about is there is a vast amount of money for European Regional Development Fund, so ERDF. So it's more to do with the length of time you have been self-employed, the length of time or the sector that you are in. So what the pilot has looked at and the evidence that we've been looking at is trying to plug those gaps. And if things like that do come up, then that's where the pilot should be able to, because it's slightly more flexible. So it's not to do with the classification of a person.
Any more questions?
I need to just come...
Yeah, of course, go on.
I'm coming back to... I need to clarify with you. At the moment, members will be asking about... Sorry, let me put that to one side. The skills pilot and also careers application. I just need to get a sense from you. Would you want to do the Part B item today?
What I've forgotten about, we're on a podcast, so we're going to have to do all of Part A today first.
Yeah.
Which I quite often in my council, we switch things around if there's nobody there from the press, but it's because of the podcast we just can't do that.
Yeah. What I mean is, Chair, we are having a... You highlighted the agenda before we started this.
We are doing it.
We're going into Part B.
My only concern would be if people leave, we may become inquirate.
Yeah, I was just confirming there'll be that. Okay, thank you.
Discuss and update the report. So, Charles.
Of course. For clarity, really, are we doing 9B now, or is that linked everything together? You know, you've got 9A and 9B linking to. Both together. Yes. So you've done both together. So I've got a question on B, which you confused things when you started talking about B in a different context. Right. No, all it was is the Mayor mentioned the Liverpool UCAS thing. And from what I've picked up on, it's not that good. But we use the same terminology for that. And if we're not careful, we could get linked into thinking that that's what we're doing. They only do the apprenticeship stuff. They don't, it's not as far-reaching as what we do. So I'm just wondering how you were, and to kind of distance ourselves a little from that, and our office should read differently.
That's a very good point, and the Chief Executive of Wigan brought that up. So the UCAS term is something that the Mayor has always used. UCAS are actually exiting the market in this space, so actually we try not to use that, but I think because it's a manifesto term, you're absolutely right. What Liverpool have come out with is what our See Different campaign is. It's just purely about applications to apprenticeships. What this paper takes you through is really that kind of clear line of sight for everybody, all those opportunities across all of those areas. And it will be somebody far more creative than I will be, even though we've just had the strategy to come up with a better name and a better concept for that. But you're absolutely right. We need to not be calling it that because, one, UCAS aren't in that space anymore. But yeah, it's absolutely a fair comment.
Good. Sorry. Yep, Chris, sorry.
Yeah, just a couple of points. On the skills pilots, how will they be monitored, measured to improve local outcomes? And on the careers applications, is there a revenue resource for schools to implement that? And we need to consider the possibility of improving access for digital disadvantaged families.
Okay, thank you. So I'll take the skills pilots. Yeah, absolutely. Everything that we develop with the local authorities. So in terms of local outcomes, particularly on the NEAT one, which is proposed to go through the Prince's Trust, that will be about actually locally, how do we engage? We've also just got a £10 million ESF contract around NEAT, so we need to make sure that they complement each other in a place, which is fantastic for areas. So local outcomes in terms of the types of individuals, how you want to refer, that will all be built into those pilots. In terms of the revenue stream, so the application, there is £700,000 that's been earmarked, which was in the previous paper. Part of that is for, obviously, the build and the technicalities of that portal. The revenue is exactly that in terms of how do we ensure that people are able to use it and are skilled to be able to do that. UCAS that we have already, because we do have UCAS Progress already in about 82 of our schools across Greater Manchester. There has been training and support involved in that, so that's why we've kept a kind of ongoing management cost in terms of contracts and service level agreements, that type of things.
Any more questions? Well, I think we just, as requested, we just note the reports, and that's great. The one thing I would say is, subject to the point that Charles made with regard to, if you like, this comparison with the proper UCAS, I think the actual concept is really good, actually. So I would applaud that, actually. But Charles makes a very valid point as well, actually. Thank you.
Yep, that's me again. I'll be really brief in introducing this because it's a short paper and I presume you've read it, but this updates on work which is just getting started now at Greater Manchester level around turbocharging gender equality in the city region. This is an issue of increasing national prominence, and section 1 of the report provides some striking figures about the GM specific issues that we face. What we're trying to do at Greater Manchester level is bring together a lot of bottom-up activity which has started to happen in this area. So initiatives like Northern Power Women, Diva Mank, the Fawcett Society work which district chief executives have been leading on, are all sort of looking at similar issues from slightly different perspectives. So we've brought together a group chaired by Brenda Warrington called the GM Women's Voices Group. What they've done is brought together all their different action plans of those different organisations and pulled it together into one long list, which are now in the process of whittling down into a clear action plan, and they'll take it their second meeting, which is coming up in the next month or so. Really, we just want to get to make you aware that this activity is happening and to get any views on the specific work programmes, priorities which have been identified.
Questions? Luke.
Thank you. This looks really good. One of the things which I come across in my job, and I'm sure you do as well, is how economic statistics often obscure the gender differences within an economy, and transport as well as another sector where we don't realise that people use the transport networks very differently according to their gender and also other sorts of things too. So it's, of course, the first thing is it's not just gender. There's all sorts of different characteristics that people have, which mean they look differently within a labour market. Are you going to do any work on that as well to sort of develop, to sort of show that nuance, to show those differences within the labour market? So unemployment and inactivity, for example, is a prime example of, you know, we over concentrate on unemployment, and that tends to be more men who are unemployed, and whereas there tends to be more women who are economically inactive, and we don't often pick up on those differences. So are you doing any work on that?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, obviously this group has been set up for a specific purpose to look at issues around equalities for women, which is an important aspect and comes through strongly, but there are wider equalities issues. You'll be aware that there's various sort of advisors and panels that have been set up looking at this. So the Disability Network, we've got an LGBT plus advisor as well, but we're aware that we're in danger of it being slightly getting siloed, so we're just looking at individual bits and not the whole. So there's discussions which are ongoing around how at a GM level we can take that broader, more holistic views of equalities in the round, starting from a data and evidence point, but putting capacity behind that. So we're taking into account, those general equalities as well as those specific groups.
On page 62, paragraphs 1.1 and 1.2 point to the fact that there's regional differences in women's employment. Do we know what factors are affecting the fact that twice as many women are working in low-paid part-time job and less than full-time jobs, and those factors?
There's a report which has been produced by the Fawcett Society for Greater Manchester, which goes into those issues. In part, you can account for some of it due to caring responsibilities, both of children and older residents. In part, there is how best to articulate this, but there is an inequality in the way that some work is perceived. So some work is perceived as women's work, and that gets lower paid, which is a sort of structural challenge that we face that absolutely needs to be addressed.
So, sorry, can I ask a thought? So will that report be coming, the Fawcett report, will it be coming to this committee?
Yeah, absolutely, we can share that with you, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a public report.
Thank you.
I think the point that Mary makes is an important point, because the trouble is, if you look at headline figures, you can actually draw wrong comparisons. You need to drill down and really understand what the various... Because there are changes, like you mentioned, which I hadn't thought about, but carers, absolutely. There are cultural issues. There are all sorts of issues. Sorry, Mary.
But I don't understand why it's prevalent in Manchester. You know, there are other places within the country where women will be primary carers as well. So I'll be interested to read the report. Thank you.
Any more questions?
Sorry, just to follow up on that, I think that the report is useful, but it only really scratches the surface still, and I think a lot of those issues need further investigation, and that's part of what the role of the Women's Voice Group will be to look at.
Any more questions? Sorry, Kate, you're around the corner. I keep on missing you. Sorry.
I just felt I ought to make a comment, really, and it's for none of the officers in here, it's for the politicians. We also need to do our bit in terms of our representation on our councils. Well done, Bury, well done, Manchester. The rest of us need to pull our socks up. The average for the country, I think, is about 32% representation for women on councils. Some of us need to hang our heads in shame. I know Jude will agree with me, because we've been talking a lot about it.
No, I have to make a political point here. You'd be pleased to know in Rochester, within the Conservative group, it's exactly 50-50. Anyway, sorry. Jude, sorry.
Sorry, I've just got a quick point. In terms of development of the action plan, what will that report to? Where does it sit within the kind of governance structure in terms of, taking things forward?
So it's an informal group, so it doesn't sit as part of the formal governance structures, and in part that's because what we're trying to do is coordinate activity on the ground, and what we don't want to happen is for the combined authority to come in with its sort of big clunking fist and stop activity which is already out there and going on.
I'll try and be really brief, but it is food for thought, and that is that please box clever on that then, because not many things that are identified as needing turbocharging end up with an informal work line. This is how I experience this in a sense. That it's interesting. I see what you're saying there, but you don't often find that. And there are other areas that, if they're identified for the need of turbocharging, the line underneath it as to why it became something that was identified as needing turbocharging. But I don't know, let's say where we've got people with no skills, say if we've got an area where that was part of what the GMCA was looking at, where there was a decision that there's people have got absolutely no skills in that area, and then a decision was made. This absolutely has to be addressed. There was sort of passion behind it, and quite rightly, many of us would hold that passion. To then find that the work stream was, well, it needs to be informal. You just don't come across that very often, do you? The other thing I would say is as well, about the fact that it's informal in a sense, is that. When I've gone through this, it's interesting that there's 3 mentions of violence against women and also against girls. There's 3 mentions of that. There's a fair bit of mention of equality, wanting to achieve equality, but it's the middle area. There's no real sense of, well, is there anything pertaining to discrimination? And I think that's it really, isn't it? Because we've got an exemplar person dealing with violence matters in the crime area, and that's our Deputy Mayor, Bev Hughes. But it's this whole larger area, the non-violence area, it's really getting a hold of, if the experience isn't a particularly good one around some of these issues, then what are the issues that would need to be dealt with as part of this turbocharging sort of plan, in a sense? I mean, that's just some food for thought, I would say.
Yeah, on that I will refine my comment about it being an informal group, and I think what I was saying there is that it doesn't sit as part of the Combined Authority's formal constitution, but it is chaired by Councillor Warrington. She's got a portfolio lead in this area and is responsible for leading on it for the Combined Authority, so it will feed into formal decision making through that role. I think it's important that issues around gender equality and broader equalities are embedded into every piece of work that the Combined Authority does and every programme. So I think that there would be a danger about it just being pigeonholed as this is the equalities bit and it sort of sits over there. Actually, this is part of everybody's job and it's a mainstream activity. I think that the points raised about discrimination being absent is a good one, and we will feed that back into the group for them to consider.
Is there any possibility that the Women's Voice group could be expanded a little bit to include a more diverse group of women's voices?
Yes, I think is the answer to that. If there are particular nominees that you are thinking about in terms of organisations or individuals, I think if we can gather those and put them forward to that group to join it. So it's intended that it's an open group, not a closed group of people making decisions for others.
Any more questions? Oh, sorry, Kate.
Sorry, I didn't think about it before, so I just wanted to add in about young women, girls' mental health as well, because it's becoming a real obstacle. There's a lot, they're more likely to self-harm. There's all sorts of statistics around how the difficulties that young women and girls at school age are having. So I just wondered if that's part of your consideration, as it is obviously clearly an inhibiting factor for them.
Again, it's not something that's come through the sort of initial bringing together of work programmes from that group. But again, part of today's session was to get views from the committee about things which are absent from that list, so we can feed that back into them. And I'm sure that given the work of the Health and Social Care Partnership around that agenda, I'm sure it seems like a sensible area to add.
Right, well, there's no more questions. We're actually asked to consider a note, we've done that, and agree the activity underway to turbocharge gender equality in Greater Manchester. I think we have done that, but we've also given you some bits of food for thought as well in terms of figures and discrimination in other areas. And I think there's some very valid points being made there, actually. So thank you for those observations. So now we're on to the, before we do the point of 13. The date and time of the next meeting is Friday the 12th of April, 2 o'clock here, normal timing, hopefully. And then we've got exclusion of the press and public. Under section 100, subsection A, subsection 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public should be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business on the grounds that this involves the like disclosure of exempt information as set out in paragraph 3, part 1, schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, and that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. So we're now on to part B, which is the adult education budget. And again, that's over to Gemma. And again, I think there's a bit more detail in here, so perhaps you would like to give a very quick précis, perhaps.
Thank you, Chair. So, yeah, this is